Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Crime in the Courtroom. John Collins here with you. Today is Monday, April 20th, 2026, and it's good to have you back. We're going to shift gears a little bit today compared to some previous episodes that we have had recently, in that we're going to be doing a coaching session, and I'm going to be sharing with you three personality traits or personality quirks, if you will, that kill leadership credibility. They absolutely kill, destroy, catastrophically, however you want to describe it. They destroy leadership credibility, and they cause members of a team to lose trust and confidence in their leaders. And so we're going to talk about this. And one of the reasons that I am choosing to talk about it in this episode is because it has come up recently in discussion, not only in some of my coaching sessions, but also in some of the leadership workshops that I do. In fact, I'm just on the tail end. I just returned back to my office here near Detroit, Michigan, from a trip down to see my friends and colleagues in Miami-Dade, Florida, where we did another Administration and Leadership Academy for government employees. We do several of those down there a year. And some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today, we cover to some extent in that workshop. But there was a particular discussion about one of the traits that we're going to be talking about today that came up last week. We had a really good class down there. In fact, I know that some of them are probably listening or watching, and I enjoyed being with you last week. So thanks for stopping in to check out the Crime in the Courtroom podcast. But a discussion came up that really sort of inspired me to discuss this on today's show, and I thought it would be a good idea to do that. So what our goal is today is to minimize as much as we can the loss of trust that individuals in positions of leadership authority and high responsibility occupations, in particular, traits that cause their followers to lose confidence, to lose trust in them. We want to minimize the chance that that happens. And there's three traits or thinking habits that, in my opinion and in my experience, will cause this loss of trust faster than anything else. So I'd like to make a particular emphasis to those of you who are new to your managerial position, because these are tendencies that I believe you're going to be more vulnerable to in the earlier years of your managerial career. And if you can become aware of these and avoid them and shape your thinking, they will really benefit you, and you will grow and you will mature much faster and for much longer as an effective leader, which is going to be our goal for today. Now, before I do that, I have a couple of quick announcements. The first is just a reminder that I'm going to be doing a full-day strength-based leadership and teamwork workshop at the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Annual Symposium here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I'm really looking forward to having this symposium here in my home state. So I will be out there actually doing a couple of different events. But Monday, May 18th is a full day workshop, strength-based leadership and teamwork. We are going to be administering the Clifton Strengths Assessment and the Big Five Personality Assessment to the attendees before they arrive. And so some of the things that we're going to be talking about in our episode today, we will be touching on in this workshop, because we're going to be doing a deep dive into individual personality traits and individual strengths leading to success. Then we have our upcoming Advanced Expert Witnessing workshop, the online version. This is the online version of Advanced Expert Witnessing, which is going to begin on Monday, May 11th through the 14th. So you can register for that. Go to criticalvictories.com/forensic, and you'll be able to register for that workshop. So again, the ASCLD Symposium, Monday, May 18th. I hope I didn't say March 18th on that. For some reason, I feel like I did. But if I did, it's the workshop at the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Annual Symposium. That is going to be on Monday, May 18th. Monday, May 18th. And advanced expert witnessing is just ahead of that. That's Monday, May 11th through the 14th. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, you can always shoot me an email at office@criticalvictories.com, office@criticalvictories.com, and I'm happy to send you a link to registration if you have any trouble finding that. So I would ask for the ASCLD Symposium. The Symposium Planning Committee is requesting that workshop registrations occur before the close of business on April 30th. So try to get that done as soon as you can so that you can join us for what is always a really, really good, enriching, very insightful workshop. And I'll look forward to having you there. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, we're having a coaching session today. And our goal is whenever we do this kind of a coaching session and talk through these issues, we are trying to help individuals who are in positions of expertise or positions of leadership who work in high responsibility occupations. So the criminal justice system, without question, is a high responsibility occupation. Working in law enforcement, working in the practice of law, working in a forensic laboratory, working as part of the judiciary. This is a high responsibility occupation. And that's relevant in the exercise of leadership because high responsibility occupations put a unique kind of pressure on leaders. And pressure affects human psychology, and it affects decision making, and it affects individual conduct. And so if you take one leader, just one particular leader, and you put them in charge of something with very low pressure, they may approach their leadership responsibilities in a particular way, but then when you crank up the pressure, all of a sudden their approach to the situation or to the relationships that they have and keep within their strategic environment can become impaired. And actually the opposite can be true as well, is that sometimes for some individuals, when you increase the pressure, they actually become more clear-headed and will make better decisions. So to add to the pressure is the very relevant and very important fact that the criminal justice system and the agencies within it tend to be very hierarchical in nature. And so if you've worked with me in the past or attended any of my workshops, or if you've read my books, this is a subject that comes up a lot. As I mentioned, and those of you that joined us for our class down in Doral, Florida, for the Administration Leadership Academy for Government Supervisors, we talked about this, and we always talk about this, that in order to be effective as a leader of a team, there is a switch that has to be in the off position, a psychological switch that has to be in the off position for you to be successful. And if it naturally wants to be in the on position, which is why this is so problematic. And I wrote about this in the New Superior. This switch has to be in the off position, and you have to turn it off intentionally. And if you don't, it's going to be in the on position because it naturally wants to be in the on position. And what that switch is the tendency to think in hierarchical terms. It's to think of yourself in a hierarchy, or to think in a hierarchical manner. So hierarchy comes naturally to the human species. In fact, hierarchy comes naturally to every species in nature. Hierarchy ensures survival in the face of adversity. All right, that's why we have it. So we're really good at that as human beings. We're good at organizing ourselves. We're good at appointing people and selecting people to have certain levels of responsibility. And we're good at arranging levels of responsibility so that lower levels of responsibility answer to the people with higher levels of responsibility, and only certain decisions or actions can be taken by certain individuals at certain levels of authority. We're really good at that. We do that well. But the reason that we do that is because we organize ourselves because we know intuitively that when we are organized and when we are structured, when crisis hits, and it does hit, it will hit, and when adversity comes, and it will come, that you will be able to weather the storm. That is the value of hierarchy. So organizations depend very heavily on it, and that's good. The problem becomes when the hierarchical mentalities become reflexive and they go out of control. And that is relevant to what we're talking about today. And so what that means is that if you want to be more than a hierarchy, if you want to be a team, and if you want to do more than just survive and cope with hardship or cope with adversity, if you want to do more than survive, which means that you want to thrive, then you've got to be able to turn that switch off the vast majority of the time. Now, every now and then you may need to turn it on. You may need to, as they say, pull rank. You may, as a leader, you may need to make a decision and say, look, we need to move forward here. We have to make a decision. We got to make it now. Okay, so there's a time for that. But the vast majority of the time, you do not need that switch in the on position. It needs to be off. And so the phrase that I use to sort of describe this in the new superior is to think of yourself as an equal in the moment, which means that, look, everybody knows what your authority is. You know, if you work at an organization, everybody knows what your rank is. You and the people that you report to and the people to whom you report know the level of authority that you have. You don't need to flaunt it. You don't need to signal it, which is the first trait that we're going to be talking about. Just be present with people, work with people, collaborate, be an equal in the moment. And when the time comes, and it's not very often that you have to do this, when the time comes that you need to pull rank, which means that you need to make a decision, you need to take a particular action that only someone in your position or at your level of authority in the organization is authorized to make, then you can do that. But the vast majority of the time, as a leader, your number one goal is just to be present and to pay attention and to listen to your people and nurture those relationships. So when that switch is stuck in the on position, that hierarchical mentality switch, there are three particular things that happen. One that I've just alluded to, that will kill the credibility of any leader faster than you can possibly imagine. It happens almost immediately, and it's devastating. One of the things that's really scary about it is how often it is that leaders or managers who display these little quirks or traits that or thinking habits that I'm going to be talking about are not aware that they're doing it. That still, I have to tell you that as a professional coach, this continues to boggle my mind. It continues to boggle my mind that people do not know that they're doing it. So what are these traits? And I want to tell you that, as for those of you that are in positions of leadership, or maybe you aspire to a position of leadership someday, if you can intentionally shape your thinking habits so that you avoid these traits and you're mindful of the way that you conduct yourself and the way that you interact with people, you are going to be so much more successful in the long run. So let me go through these one at a time. And I just, in the interest of time today, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I want to lay these out so that you can be aware of them and we can talk about, the damage that is done when people engage in these. The first is what, again, I wrote about in the New Superior, which is called superiority signaling. I also referred to it as the kiss my ring mentality. And superiority signaling arises, at least in an organizational context, from an innate desire to know that people who are beneath you in the organizational structure know that you are the superior. And what's interesting about this, and I want to be careful here, in fact, in my library, I have a book on the neuropsychology of coaching. I don't want to overextend my expertise because I'm not a neurocognitive psychologist, and I don't specialize in that biological side of human personality and human psychology. But one of the things that we do know is that, and this reinforces, by the way, the natural tendency for human beings to be hierarchical, is that as a human being, when you assert your dominance, or when you feel that your place in the hierarchy has been established and is being recognized or is being secured, right? In other words, you've done something, let's say, to avoid the threat to the authority that you do have, or somebody signals their inferiority or their subordination to you, you actually get a dose of feel-good chemicals in your brain. It's really fascinating. So nature wants you to be hierarchical. It wants you to assert dominance. Or if you are not in a position of leadership, it wants you to signal your subordination. In other words, when we establish our place within a hierarchy and we secure that place, in other words, it gives us a feeling of safety, we get this rush of feel-good chemicals. So what happens is that individuals that are prone to these hierarchical behaviors are often vulnerable to superior behaviors that we will call superiority signaling. And there's different kinds. There's moral signaling, which is, and I've seen this a lot, and it's very destructive. These are individuals using various different mechanisms that want to signal their moral superiority or showcase the fact, at least in their own minds, that they are better human beings than the other people around them. They fancy themselves as being morally superior to just about everyone else, and they want to make that clear. And there's different ways that they do this. And I want to be careful here because I have to admit there's a little bit of a risk here of offending some people, particularly people of faith, which I have absolutely no desire and no need to disparage people that are very faithful in their lives and even in their careers. But in some instances, religious kinds of behavior can be used to establish moral superiority or to signal moral superiority. And it can be very, very offensive to people. And it makes people feel like they're being judged, right? So this moral signaling is deeply offensive to people. Intellectual signaling, I'm smarter than everyone else. In fact, one of the more common legitimate forms of intellectual signaling are all the letters that people like to put after their names, right? How many of you, I'm curious, how many of you on LinkedIn, even though it only asks for your name and your first name and your last name, in your last name, you put your last name and then your credential letters? That's superiority signaling. I'm not saying that what you're doing is bad, but we're trying to be clear about what it is. We are signaling dominance. We're signaling strength in a hierarchy. I'm smarter than other people. I'm more experienced. I'm more credentialed than other people. It's signaling. There's even physical signaling. Some people, as I wrote in The New Superior, Lyndon B. Johnson, the President of the United States, after President Kennedy was killed in 1963, he was very well known for physical signaling. He was a tall man, and he would get right in people's faces. He would point at them. So he liked to assert physical dominance to intimidate people. And then there's social signaling. I want to drive a nicer car than everybody else. I want to wear nicer clothes than everybody else. different ways. I want my lawn to be nicer than everybody else's. Now, that's not to say that there's something wrong with having a nice lawn, right? Or driving a nice car. It's the intention behind it that is the problem, because intentions eventually make themselves manifest. And if your intention is to assert dominance or to signal your superiority, people will eventually realize it. And that is when you start to lose people. And that's when relationships start to break down. In the organizational setting, we have what's called organizational signaling. So for those of you in law enforcement, and there's actually a tactical and strategic reason for this. You wear a badge. You may have a patch on your arm or stripes on your arm. That's organizational signaling. I am a superior. I have higher rank. Again, it's not that it's illegitimate and out in public. That can be valuable. But it is superiority signaling. And one of the things that happens in organizations, which is really what I want to narrow down on or focus in on with regards to this particular trait, is that individuals, as they work their way through the hierarchy, and this is very common in the guardian professions, the law enforcement, military, and so forth, is that people gain a sense, individuals in these organizations gain a sense that if my superiority is not being recognized in some way, or if I have to go too long before somebody signals their subservience to me, or doesn't, let's say, to use the word, worship my superiority, then I feel like I'm choking to death. Like I need somebody to worship my superiority, to kiss my ring, to remind me that I have power and control and therefore I am safe, which is really what signaling is all about. It's an action that is taken by individuals who feel insecure and they need reassurance that they are safe in the hierarchy. The secondary problem that arises from this is that it causes reciprocal signaling. And although this is something that as you can tell, I've thought a lot about this over the years. I didn't write about this particular point in the new superior that I'm going to be talking right now, but it's what I would describe as reciprocal signaling. So if I'm working with an individual, for example, that is sort of a hopeless superiority signaler, what happens is that it offends. So let's say that that's my supervisor. What it does is that signaling offends my own sense of security within the hierarchy, and it makes me feel like that individual is trying to gain a foothold in the hierarchy at my expense by making me feel small. So when you have supervisors that try to make themselves feel big and safe and powerful at the expense of their people will resent it. And some people will come to resent it faster than others. And so what you get is you can get reciprocal signaling, resentment signaling. And sometimes if you show me a manager, a leader, whatever you want to call it, a supervisor, that is sort of a hopeless superiority signaler, then I will show you a team that is more prone to misbehavior, because people do not like to be made to feel inferior. So if you are in a position of management and you want to lose the trust of your team, just signal your superiority. Engage in these little behaviors that it's evident to everybody around you that you are signaling your superiority out of insecurity, right? So organizational signaling can come in a lot of different forms. I'm going to share one with you that happened to me, and I'm not gonna name the agency that I was working at. It doesn't matter. But I had a supervisor, and he was a sworn law enforcement commander. I was the director, forensic laboratory director, and I would go to his office, and he liked to summon me. Fortunately, he wasn't my boss for very long. He liked to summon me or summon people to his office. And so you would show up at his office and he would sit back in his chair. He would ask you to come in and he would never look you in the eye, which is something I always found interesting. He would ask you to say, hey, he'd say, hey, John, have a seat. And then once I had a seat and said, just, I got your email or I got your call. What's going on? How can I help you? What he would do is he would lean back in his chair, kind of turn to the side and look out the window, and he would take his reading glasses off. And he had this little cloth that he kept in his pocket, and he would wipe his reading glasses. And while he was talking to me, he would be looking out the window. And at first, I just thought it was, when it first happened, I just thought it was maybe just, like a personality trait or just kind of an idiosyncrasy of his, and I really didn't think much of it. But as it happened a third time, a fourth time, fifth time, 10th time, 15th time, I started to realize that this was a power play, that he was signaling his superiority and just not even giving me the courtesy of sitting forward in his desk, looking at me in the eye and being an equal in the moment. In other words, what is it that we need to talk about here? What is our common goal? What's our common objective? Because remember, when you're a leader and you're working with employees who report to you, they are not just your employees, and you are not just their supervisor. You are partners working together towards a common mission. So you share that in common. And in that regard, you are equals. You have the same mission. But when you get these supervisors like to signal their superiority, they get a little bit of a dopamine, serotonin rush in their brain by making other people feel small. The people that are made to feel small will eventually resent it. And I did leave that organization. So I voted with my feet. So I want to close this out by just reminding everybody, or this particular trait, superiority signaling, is to remember what the goal is that when it comes to being a leader and when it comes to being a subordinate in the organizational structure, it doesn't matter what your rank is. You have the same mission. You should be equally loyal to the same mission, to the same objectives, to the same goals, to the same values. When you have a situation where particularly a person in a position of leadership is taking their eye off the ball and they have a different sort of quiet private mission, which is to inflate their own sense of importance and security, then that deceptiveness is going to be figured out, and that's where the trust blows up. So just remember the phrase equals in the moment. There's a time and place to turn on your rank switch. There's a time and place to assert yourself, to say, hey, look, we need to take an action here. We need to make a decision. There comes a time, even in very professional environments, where you may have to give a direct order. Okay, those times will present themselves, and they're usually pretty self-evident when they arrive. But the vast majority of time, the vast majority of minutes and hours that we spend with our people, we do not need to have that hierarchy switch on. It needs to be shut off, and you have to do it intentionally, because for many people it is it's so natural that it can be a very tough switch to turn off. Okay, I want to go to the second trait, the credibility killer for leaders in high responsibility occupations. And this we can actually tie into the 5 dimensions of personality, or 2 of the 5 dimensions of personality that we test for in my practice here, and that we will be talking about at the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Symposium in Grand Rapids on May 18th. And two of those dimensions of personality are openness and conscientiousness. And there's no good or bad end of the spectrum, although the conscientiousness spectrum tends to be a major predictor of personal and professional success. But very, very conscientious people also have some things that they struggle with. So let me just explain, first of all, what these mean if you haven't heard me talk about this before. So very quickly, openness is a receptivity to new ideas or new ways of doing things, or to new experiences, new people, new situations, visiting new places. And so people that are very open are more welcoming of different ways of thinking and new experiences. People that are lower in openness tend to be people that we would describe as very kind of secure in their thinking, very committed to a particular way of thinking or a particular way of doing things. They're a little bit closed off to other ideas, and that can actually, in certain situations, be a good thing. New ideas, new experiences are not always good. And so people that are low in openness or lower in openness are kind of a hedge against that risk to the extent that there is a risk, and sometimes there is. Conscientiousness is industriousness, productivity, organization, focus, sense of responsibility, sense of right and wrong. People that are low in conscientiousness tend to be a little bit more impulsive, but they also tend to be a little bit more adaptable, a little bit more flexible. The personality trait, the credibility killer that we're talking about here, tends to arise, in my opinion and in my experience, with people who are low in openness and high in conscientiousness. But it doesn't. So if you've worked with me before and you've taken the Big Five personality test and you are lower in openness and higher in conscientiousness, this does not necessarily mean that you are going to engage in this behavior. But one of the trait that I want to bring to your attention here, and I want to encourage you to reflect on this to see if it's something that you engage in your life or in your career, is sort what we would call a stop mentality. And the stop mentality, interestingly, is somewhat related to the first trait that we talked about with regards to superiority signaling, because sometimes, and this can be quite destructive, when leaders or managers use their authority to stop progress or to slow progress, sometimes it's out of fear, sometimes it's out of a sense of deliberativeness, but sometimes it can be a form of superiority signaling, as if to say, see what power I have? Do you see what I can do here? Do you see how I can slow this down? Do you see how this team is nothing without me? Right? It depends on the person, and it depends on the degree of egregiousness, I guess, of the trait. But this stop mentality tends to be fairly reflexive. And in this particular instance that we're talking about, it gives the leader the feeling that they are doing something with their authority. And the analogy that I like to use, you made me hear me talk about this in one of my workshops, where, here in Michigan, we get a lot of snow. And so there's a lot of people here that, own houses, and we have snow blowers to clear our driveways when we get in our sidewalks when we get really heavy downfalls of snow. And so a lot of times in the fall, people will go out, and that's when the snow blowers start to show up at Home Depot or Lowe's, or or at the hardware stores, and people want to buy their snowblower. And what's funny is when you buy yourself a new snowblower, let's say it's October, you cannot wait for the first snowfall because you want to use your new snowblower. You're sitting there waiting. I can't wait. I want like 8-10 inches of snow so I can go out there and clear my driveway with my new snowblower. Unfortunately, many times people that are promoted into positions of management feel the same way about their newly acquired level of authority. They desperately want to use it. And oftentimes it's a big mistake. And I've coached a lot of first-time managers on this. And it's not always, I need to change this policy, or we're going to start taking this action, or I want to make this change. A lot of times it's putting a stop to things. We're not doing this anymore. I'm in charge now. We're not doing this. So it's a stop mentality. And oftentimes, and if the stop mentality has strategic legitimacy, that's different. In my career, I've put a stop to things after I was promoted into a position of management. But there was a strategic reason for it, an articulable, evidence-based strategic reason for it. But when the stop-based mentality is reflexive and it's just to show power, it can be very destructive. Now, there's a variant of that is really what I want to bring to your attention. And what that is this is a trait that is manifested in leaders who oftentimes have this stop mentality. And because of the stop mentality, they do not exhibit the ability to distinguish a cost from value. And so when people come up with ideas, and this is where the openness comes into play, when people have ideas about, hey, you could be at a staff meeting and employees come up, with suggestions for certain things, and particularly if it requires the expenditure of funds. What leaders who succumb to this temptation will often do is they will come up with a way to put a stop to it, or to sort of quash the idea. In other words, no, we're not going to do that. Or we'll talk about it later. We're not going to talk about it right now. It's too expensive. I don't want to spend the money on that. But remember, as a leader, your people are counting on you to make decisions, to take actions, or to assert influence for reasons that have strategic legitimacy and that are evidence-based. And if they sense that you have the ability to see cost, but you don't have the ability to see value, in other words, you're cost alert, but you're value blind, it's really hard to have trust and faith in you and to have respect in your leadership authority, because all you see is cost. Oh, this costs this amount of money. Okay, yeah. That's always a legitimate conversation to have, how much something costs. Look, particularly in the public sector, if we work in government agencies, we have to be good stewards of taxpayer resources. So yeah, we need to have conversations about cost. But you can't have an intelligent conversation about cost unless you're also talking about value. Because a lot of things that we spend money on in government are investments that we expect to pay a return. And as a leader, if you're not smart enough or wise enough or strategic enough to know how to create the right balance between cost and value, you're hard to trust, because people will see you as reflexive, and people don't trust leaders who they perceive as reflexive or impulsive. So to the extent that you're in a position of leadership and you've got a team of people that are counting on you to be at your best, always be mindful of the strategic legitimacy of the ideas that are being kicked around by your team, including your own. And it's a good skill to teach your employees, to teach the members of your team, and to model it for your team, that you're constantly analyzing evidence, and you're trying to understand what is the evidence that tends to point in a particular direction when a certain decision or action has to be made or taken. So be very, very wary and very cautious of the stop mentality. I do think it comes naturally. It's part of the hierarchical mindset, right? I'm going to exert my power. I'm going to put a stop to this, even when there may not be a good strategic reason to put a stop to it. So the third and final credential killer is related to the second one. You can see how these kind of build on themselves. And this is very psychological in nature, but we're going to describe it here as a lack of capacity for self-inquiry. And I want to set this up a little bit so that it makes sense. Human beings, regardless of what we do personally or professionally, or in a professional context, regardless of what level of authority we have or what we do for a living, we navigate the world around us, and we navigate our relationships, and we navigate our strategic environment by paying attention to things. And then what we do is we tell ourselves, we send messages to ourselves about what those things mean. And that gives us confidence that we know what's going on around us, and that we can make whatever decisions we need to make, or take whatever actions we need to take in order to be effective in whatever it is that we're trying to do. Right? This is basic. This is pre-leadership, if you will. And so we are really good, and this comes very naturally to us, we are really good at telling ourselves stories and explaining things to ourselves about what's going on around us. So you've probably had, a disagreement with a loved one or somebody at work, and it really bothered you, and you told yourself a story about why that person was behaving as they were, or why did that person say what they said or do what they did, or why are they thinking what they're thinking. And you tell yourself a story. You explain it to yourself. And this is something, again, we do very, very naturally. We want to explain to ourselves the unknown. And so over the course of our lives, we become very, very good at telling ourselves stories, paying attention to what's going on around us, and explaining them. And that's good. But there's another level that people can hit, and there's another level that you have to hit when you're in a position of leadership or influence in a high responsibility occupation, is that you have to go beyond telling yourself stories, and you have to go beyond explaining things to yourself. What you also have to do, and it has to become the dominant part of your thinking habits, is you have to ask yourself questions. This is one of the things that good coaches help their clients do. I hope I'm a good coach. I try my best. And this is a practice that I practice what I preach. I am constantly reflecting and asking myself questions about what I'm thinking, or what I'm seeing, what I'm observing, what I'm witnessing, asking myself questions about things that I want to do or things that I don't want to do. And so it is a question you actually formulate in your mind, and you ask it to yourself. And one of the most valuable coaching tools that I use, I don't use it, I don't have to use it all that often, because I can do this, I can ask these questions in a coaching session, and I can work with my client to sort of nudge them towards of asking themselves questions about something that's going on in their environment, or something that's bothering them, or an opportunity that they're maybe trying to leverage that they have before them. But when I have clients that have really, really serious challenges that they, problems that they're trying to solve, or there's a really, really major opportunity that is in front of them, such as an opportunity to be promoted into a much higher level of authority within their organization, what I will ask them to do is a really simple exercise, and this is one that you can do in a lot of different contexts in your life and career, is to sit down with like a piece of paper or a legal pad or a notebook or something like that, and whatever it is that you're facing, whatever problem you're facing, whatever opportunity that you're facing, write down as many questions as you can, questions you're asking of yourself that you believe you need to answer to put yourself in the best position to solve this problem or to take advantage of this opportunity. And what that does is that helps train the individual to adopt an inquisitive mindset as opposed to an explanatory mindset. Really what you're doing, it's one of the things that I find interesting about this, is that you're not eliminating the explanatory tendencies that we have, but what you're doing is you're putting a little bit of a gap, or you're creating just a little bit of a delay between your experiences and your observations and your explanations, and you're in between those, you're putting in these questions. Okay, so getting into the habit of asking yourself questions is absolutely critical. So I'll give you just an example. You may have, it's very common for people in management to be struggling with an employee that they perceive as underperforming or misbehaving, let's say. If you're too quick to go into explanatory mode, you can come up with different reasons and explanations in your own mind for why this is happening. This person is being a jerk. We got to put this person on a performance improvement plan. This person needs to be fired. We need to suspend this person. I need to write this person up, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that those are necessarily the wrong answers. That, they might be the right answers. But you're more likely to make the right choices and to take the right actions if you pause and you ask yourself some questions. For example, could there be some reasons here that I'm not aware of for why this person is behaving this way? And what might those be? Is there anything that I have done as a manager that I could have done better that might have prevented the behaviors or substandard performance that I'm witnessing? Is there anything about my management style that is creating confusion and therefore causing anxiety for this individual? So that's an example of adopting an inquisitive mindset. In my view, this third problem that we're talking about and the solution to it can mitigate the first two that we talked about, the superiority signaling and the stop mentality, is to ask yourself questions. Constantly ask yourself questions. Good questions. It's almost like interviewing yourself. There was here in Detroit, obviously the automotive industry is a big part of our history and a big part of our culture. And I don't remember, this is a story that I heard a number of years ago, but there was an executive working for one of the automotive industries that people would walk by his office and they would look and they would see him with his feet on his desk, just kind of staring out the window or looking at the wall. And people thought that was odd. And eventually word got around about this, and apparently somebody confronted him, like, do you work at all? And, like, what are you doing? And what he explained is he said, I'm thinking. And he happened to be in a job where creativity was very, very important. He was trying to solve some pretty consequential problems that required really creative solutions. And that's what I'm encouraging each and every one of us to do, including me, is do not discount the value of taking time to reflect and think and ask yourself questions. If you work in a police department, if you work in a forensic science laboratory, a prosecutor's office, a defender's office, you operate in a very execution intensive environment. It's an environment that rewards productivity. It's an environment that rewards fast action and fast decision making. And there is work to keep up with that is coming through the front doors, and you're trying to avoid backlogs. And in those environments, there's a tendency to culturally dismiss the importance of thinking and to dismiss the importance of taking the time to do what I'm encouraging us to do here, which is to ask yourself questions. Because in the asking of questions, you create in your own mind, you create your own internal quality assurance system to make sure that the things that you say, the things that you do, the ways that you behave, the way that you show up for people in both your personal and professional life is going to have as much quality to it as possible. And it's really worth it, because when your actions and your decisions and your responses, your ideas, when they have strategic value and when they're based on thought, and when you've thought through things and you've asked yourself the right questions, then your people are going to naturally, in turn, see the value and the strength in the way that you are showing up for them as a leader, and they're going to trust you, or they're much, much more likely to trust you. So no matter where you are in your own career, your own leadership career, most of you that listen and watch this podcast work in the criminal justice system, or the criminal justice system is important to you in some way. If you have a track record, if you think you may have had you may have a track record of doing some things not as well as you could have, or making some mistakes, or engaging in some of these behaviors that we're talking about, these credential killers, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to take a different approach. And what I would encourage you to do is tell your people that you want to take a different approach, that you recognize that you can be better and that you need their help. What a non-hierarchical thing to do. That is an example of turning that switch off, letting go of the hierarchy in the moment, being equal in the moment, and asking your people for their help and telling them that, look, I'm not perfect, I need your help. It's a great way to earn people's trust and their admiration and their respect. Some things to think about. If you are a leader, an influencer in a high responsibility occupation, your number one objective is to earn and retain the trust of your people. And these three behaviors or tendencies that we have talked about here will erode that trust or erode that credibility just about as fast as anything that you can ever think of. So I hope you find this helpful. And with that, I would like to thank you again for joining me for another episode of Crime in the Courtroom. As always, the opinions expressed on our show are those of your host, John Collins, that's me, as well as our guests, and should not be construed as representing the opinions of our sponsors, collaborators, or any other professionals or organizations with whom we may be affiliated. And just a quick reminder, as always, if you are interested in our world-class, on-demand, and affordable training program for building your authoritative presence and conflict management skills, please visit criticalvictories.com/showupstrong. And if you are a police commander, forensic scientist, or forensic laboratory administrator, or a professional in a high responsibility occupation looking for a powerful but convenient way to achieve the high resolution self-awareness necessary to be at your best even when everything is on the line, please check out my coaching page at criticalvictories.com/coaching. That's criticalvictories.com/coaching. You can start the process right now without any obligation, and I would love to work with you and any members of your team striving to build the skills and internal strength that they need to meet whatever new or growing responsibilities they've been entrusted with. We will see you next time for another edition of Crime in the Courtroom. Let's all be safe, be great, and let's all stay committed to being a force for good and for protecting our quality of life from sea to shining sea. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.